This evening, we are going to complete last in the series, and there have been 7 episodes so far, on the origins and development of the destroyer. And this is really going to deal with the period post-1990. Although in the case of the Royal Navy, Michael Redding will be referring to some of the plans for the future ships of the Royal Navy. We're going to do it by having Michael speak first about the Royal Navy and the European navies. He'll be followed by Alistair Feltham, who'll deal with the Russian Navy. And that will then be followed by Paul Fontenay, who will cope with the United States, the Japanese, and the Chinese, the fastest growing navy in the world. Okay, so over to you, Michael.
Thank you. So my talk is about destroyers and frigates of the Royal Navy post-1990. The Royal Navy closed the Cold War with about 50 destroyers and frigates. Shortly after 1990, the older and out-of-date vessels were sold to other navies or were scrapped. This took the number down to about 30 to 35 in 2000. Then, as the present century is unfolding, the number has been further reducing. At the end of 2023, it stood at 17, comprising 6 destroyers and 11 frigates. But with 2 more Type 23 frigates going to be laid up in 2024, the number will drop to 15. Our government states that it is planning for about 24 destroyers and frigates by the 2030s. Presume this is a combination of the new construction and the present serving vessels. Still fall short of numbers that would be needed in the event of war. It is said that each current and planned vessel is worth around 4 of their predecessors in terms of capability. This is all very well, but should a conflict or war arise, it will be numbers that will be needed. Those in power state that in this event, we would rely on our allies to support us, make up the lack of our own warships. This would inevitably be the USA and perhaps the larger Commonwealth countries. Our European neighbours simply do not have spare vessels for us to use. This has been confirmed by the recent Red Sea conflict, where the Royal Navy and the US Navy have deployed their vessels to protect merchant shipping, but the other Europeans have not come forward with warships. At least this was the case in March 2024, when this presentation has been completed. Just to touch upon other European navies, Belgium has 2 small frigates, Carol Dorman class, purchased from the Netherlands in 2008. Their tonnage is 2,800. They have a speed of 30 knots. France has 3 classes of frigates, Cassard, Horizon, and under construction their FREM, that stands for Frigate, a European multipurpose, known as the Aquitaine class. There were just 2 Cassards, both retired by 2021. Their finances have caused cutbacks. In 2013, the planned aircraft carrier was cancelled, and the number of FREMS cut back from 17 to 11, and then to the present 8. The French FREMS were and are being built in common with the Italian Bergaminis. The Horizon class vessels have the same missile and radar outfit as the RN Type 45s. Germany has 3 classes of frigate: Brandenburg's 4, Saxon's 3, and Baden-Württemberg 4. These are missile-armed frigates, and the latest is similarly equipped to our Type 45s. The Germans are developing successor frigates for delivery in the late 2020s, early 2030s. Norway has 4 frigates of the Frigate Nansen class. In 2020, it was announced these would not be replaced until after 2030. Portugal has 1 frigate of the AO Belo class and another of the Bartolomeu Diaz class. Spain has 1 frigate, the Almirante Juan de Bourbon. Italy has built and is building 2 destroyers and 2 frigates for delivery in 2025-2026. These will replace the present Durand de la Pen destroyers. The new vessels are of the Bergamini class frigates, being built to the same design as the French Aquitaine class frigates. The Netherlands has 5 frigates, with replacement of their Dormans in 2028-2030. The other European navies, apart from Denmark, have no destroyers or frigates. That means our European neighbours do not have enough vessels for their own needs, let alone supporting any other country. Let us take a look at the situation for the Royal Navy at the close of the Cold War. The Royal Navy included these destroyers: HMS Bristol, most of the Type 42s. In terms of frigates, there were most of the Leanders, Type 21s, and Type 22s. By 2013, nearly all of these had been sold or scrapped. The exception was Bristol, retained as a de-armed training ship. This left the Royal Navy with the new Type 45 destroyers and the Type 23 frigates. The Type 23s have been escorting both our carriers and those of other North Atlantic Treaty Organization navies, as well as fulfilling other duties. It is a good job these are general purpose frigates, as well as missile vessels. It is almost like our destroyers are being treated as cruisers and the frigates as the maids of all work. The Type 45s had a checkered early career. It was found that their gas generators that work in our climate did not when these destroyers were in the warmer Persian waters. All 6 have had to have additional generators fitted to fix the defect. This took a few years and reduced our capability. Thank goodness there was not any significant war or conflict directly involving the Royal Navy. But there have been crises where the Royal Navy has participated, such as the Gulf War, and very recently, in late 2023, that in the Red Sea, where drones have been fired against merchant shipping. One of our Type 45s, HMS Diamond, and an American destroyer, USS Mason, using their respective missiles, have brought down the drones. This conflict continues. The Type 45s were built between 2003 to 2012. Each cost over £1 billion. They are classified destroyers, even though their tonnage is some 7,500 and their length some 500 feet. The propulsion is combined gas and diesel. The Type 42s that these destroyers replace were over 2,000 tons less. The armament of the Type 45s includes a 4.5-inch Mark 8 multi-role automatic gun, Sea Viper principal anti-aircraft missile system. This is coupled with the Samson multi-purpose and the S1850M long-range early warning radars. There is Phalanx close-in weapon systems. This is an automatic system that operates independent of the ship. The helicopter is a Merlin or a pair of Wildcats, and there are 30mm guns on either side of the ships. Big problem is the too few numbers, only 6. The planned upgrade refit during 2026 to 2032 will extend their life, but during the work, each will be out of action for several months, perhaps a year to 18 months. Normally, this is not a problem, because in other circumstances, there are plenty of others to fill the gap, but not in this case. PAMS is part of a joint development by the UK, France, and Italy. All 3 are using this combined missile and radar system. Type 45s should be replaced by 83s. Their feasibility contracts are underway, but it will be mid to late 2030s before any are operational. I suspect, from past delays for various reasons, that the 2040s will be more realistic. The Type 83s will introduce lessons learnt from the present Ukraine war, will have automatic sensing systems and advanced radars offering longer range and hence better reaction time, especially when these destroyers are escorting other warships. So our destroyers from several hundred at the height of World War II have shrunk to a handful. Frigates have slightly fared better, although their numbers are well down on their height in World War II. Current number is 11, made up of Type 23s. The original 16 started building in 1987, and the last was 2005. The earliest have been retired from the Royal Navy to leave the present 11 operational frigates. Type 23s have a 4.5-inch Mark 8 gun, Sea Scepter anti-aircraft missiles, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, 30mm single mountings, one each side. They have towed arrayed sonar. The helicopter is a Merlin or 2 Wildcats. These frigates are to be replaced by Type 26. The first, Glasgow, is due to enter service in 2026-2027. She is currently under construction, being fitted out. They will be close on 7,000 tonnes. As each enters service, a Type 23 will be taken out. But as just 8 Type 26 are planned for the Royal Navy, suggests that either 3 of the Type 23s will be retained, or that numbers will drop below the present 17 destroyers and frigates. The Australians are planning to have 9, but this has been reduced to 6, and the Canadians 15 of the Type 26s. In addition to Type 26, the Royal Navy will also get Type 31s. 5 are planned to enter service from 2027. They are 455 feet long and will be 5,700 tonnes with combined diesel and diesel propulsion. They are missile-armed general-purpose frigates. The first Type 31 HMS Venturer was laid down on the 26th of April 2022. The next HMS Active had its first steel cut on the 24th of January 2023. They are being built by Babcock on the Tyne. Currently, at the end of 2023, Venturer is soon to be launched, and the keel of Active has been laid. These frigates are to be known as the Inspiration class. As well as these, 5 Type 32 are being developed, according to the announcement in November 2020. These are also missile general-purpose frigates, but it will be the 2030s at earliest before they enter service. So, Types 83 destroyers and 26, 31 and 32 frigates will have similar armament concepts as their predecessors, but with latest developments, variations and enhancements. The developments include the laser weapon system currently being progressed, and which has successfully shot down a drone. These laser weapons have been announced by the Ministry of Defence as part of the armament for the Type 83 destroyers. To sum up, the Royal Navy has large, highly capable, expensive destroyers and frigates, both existing and planned, but there are far too few of them. Generally, destroyers are tasked with anti-aircraft duties and frigates anti-submarine. But these distinctions have become blurred due to the too few numbers. Each does more or less what the other does. The present conflict in the Red Sea is an example where a Type 23 frigate, HMS Richmond, has taken over from a Type 45 destroyer, HMS Diamond, in the duty of protecting merchant shipping from drone attacks. This was so that the Type 45 could replenish its missiles. This has required sailing some 3,000 miles to Gibraltar. Back in World War II and into the 1950s, the Royal Navy had use, by way of example, of Aden, Alexandria, or Malta. Now, all of these overseas bases have been relinquished. What our Navy will need in the event of a large-scale conflict are numbers of smaller, cheaper warships. They used to be called corvettes and sloops. The Royal Navy has patrol vessels, such as the River class, that could serve this purpose. They would then be the backbone of escort vessels for the merchant convoys and for general duties. This would leave our high-value, overly large destroyers and frigates for certain specialist duties, including being principal escort vessels for our and NATO aircraft carriers.
So, 1989, the previous presentations a couple of months ago on Cold War destroyers showed us how the Russian Navy was building up and was in very good shape at the end of the 80s. There was serial production of modern warships. These were things like Kirov battle cruisers, Lava missile cruisers, such as the one on the bottom there, the Sovremeny, which was an air defense destroyer shown in the middle, the Udaloy anti-submarine destroyer shown top left. The Navy was in good shape, absolutely superb, and the submarine picture was similar, with lots of different classes, all very capable platforms. But then the new Russia found it had no money at all. And personnel went unpaid, there was no fuel, rate of shipbuilding collapsed, maintenance was non-existent, and the Navy literally rotted in port. And there are numerous photographs you can find of Russian naval vessels in the Far East and in the Western Seas, just sitting, rotting, which is a very sad sight indeed. And so after 5 years, around about 1995, the Russian Navy was just a real shadow of its former self. A lot of the older vessels were just taken out of the order of battle, scrapped. The more modern vessels were retained, but morale was poor and serviceability was really questionable, so they weren't really an effective force. And if we look at the numbers on this chart here, these are taken from the annual IISS Strategic Balance publication. As we've discussed already, the distinction between destroyers, cruisers and frigates and even corvettes is a little bit fluid, but using the definitions that IISS used, you can see how by 1995, 1996, the number of surface combatants had dropped dramatically. But what the Russian Navy was trying to do was retain the best quality destroyers that were fairly recent, the Sovremenies and Udaloys, and some of the frigates to have some form of fighting force, even though their numbers had dropped dramatically. And the Russians themselves, we've talked about definitions of a frigate and destroyer and cruiser before. The Russians have their own designations, which don't necessarily overlap perfectly, so interpretation of numbers is a little bit fluid. And for example, the Udaloy destroyer, the class name is Frigate in Russian, which means frigate, but they call it a destroyer. And when it went into refit, one of those went into refit in 2020, and it came out as a redesignated Udaloy frigate. So very, very fluid. And we see here on this slide a graphic produced by the US Office of Naval Intelligence, and they provide a picture in 2021 of the Russian surface combatant fleet. And I've highlighted there the 3 Sovremenies that were still in service at that point, and the 8 Udalois that were in service at that point. Those were the only vessels that were labelled as destroyer at that stage. And you can see that the majority of the surface combatants are frigates or patrol vessels of some form, and some of the light frigates are very similar to the patrol vessels. There's not an awful lot of difference between them. But what's also quite interesting is if you look at the top right, you've got frigates such as the Krivaks still in the inventory, and Grishas as well. They're very old platforms. And so Russia, even in 2021, was struggling. You won't be able to read this, but if you go on the Office of Naval Intelligence website, you can download a high resolution graphic of this. This is about a 2016 picture of the estimate of Russian Navy new construction. And when you look at the details, you find there's absolutely no destroyers in that plot whatsoever. There are some plenty of corvettes and patrol vessels, some frigates, but no destroyers whatsoever. And even the larger build frigates are being produced at a very slow rate. The Sterogoschi corvettes and Admiral Gorshkov frigates are slowly coming online. But even these have their difficulties. The Admiral Gorshkov, which is the sort of great white hope for the surface combat fleet of the Russian Navy, the first 2 of class had some Ukrainian power plants in them, which were excellent. Obviously, with the relationships between Russia and Ukraine, Russia is unable to use Ukrainian power plants anymore in their Admiral Gorshkov frigates. And they've had to use indigenous designs, which are very underpowered in comparison. And it means that some of the sensors and weapon systems on the Admiral Gorshkov frigates can't be used at full capacity because there just isn't the power budget within the vessel to be able to operate all the systems at full capacity. And some of the aging Udalois and Sovremenies are being dusted off and upgraded with new weapon systems and sensors and control systems, unique control systems, obviously, upgraded to operate the new weapons. So last month I mentioned in the talk about the Russian surface fleet, and an Udaloi upgrade typically would take away one of the guns, take away some of the older anti-submarine missiles, take away the torpedo tubes, take away some of the anti-submarine mortars, and replace those with harpoon-like anti-ship missiles and a couple of lots of vertical launch cells, which are mix and match. You can put various different weapons in those vertical launch cells in modern vessels. And the sort of weapons that could go in are things such as the Kar-35 on the right there, which is very similar to Harpoon. You have caliber missiles, which have a reasonable range, can be used for land attack or anti-ship. And you have on the left there the Zircon missile, which was trumpeted by Putin a few years ago as being a wonderful hypersonic anti-ship weapon. That is slowly coming into service, allegedly, but the capability of that is probably well below what Mr. Putin would have liked. And the military-industrial complex in Russia is probably incapable of delivering the vision that Putin had set them. I wonder how many heads will roll with that. Admiral Gorshkov frigate, that's the one that is the Great White Hope. You can see there the vertical launch cells at the front. Some of the cells are for general purpose weapons, some of them are just for anti-air warfare. And the little image in the inset is allegedly a Zircon hypersonic missile being launched, but whether it really was or whether it was something else is open to a little bit of debate. They're very similar in shape to the frigates we saw earlier and the destroyers we saw earlier from Western navies. Helicopter platform, hangar, phased array radars, vertical launch cells, gun for shore bombardment, and that's the shape of vessels these days at the higher end of the capability. And effectively, they have destroyer-like qualities. You don't necessarily need a destroyer to launch missiles, and Russia's invested quite heavily in other ways of launching missiles against targets at sea and against land. And there's lots of marketing going on across various parts of the third world trying to market Russian weapon systems in a containerized form. You might have a container which contains a targeting radar. You might have a container that contains hidden missile tubes. They might be land attack, they might be anti-ship missiles, but these are very, very modular. You can put them on roll and roll off ferries, you can put them on landing craft, you can put them on land, you can put them on trains. A very, very flexible system. And so warfighting, as far as Russia's concerned, doesn't necessarily need warships. They've sort of tried to get around their problem of not being able to produce enough and not being able to man enough by putting these other sorts of systems into the mix. So in some ways, it's a little bit like the drone issue, in that if they start deploying drones that are capable of taking out bigger warships, in a very similar way, an ISO container on board a ship might have a capability to threaten you, and you need to be a little bit aware of what might be floating around the ocean. And it makes up for the low numbers of proper warships. Talking of proper warship, a few years ago, there were models of this wonderful 19,000-ton destroyer, probably a cruiser in old speak. It was called the Leader class. Russia was touting this as its future core of the surface combatant fleet. Looked wonderful, lots and lots of missile systems. The missiles would all be vertical launch, so allowing you to mix and match. It would have plenty of helicopter capacity, and you can see 2 helicopter spots at the back there, with hangars underneath to contain those helicopters. The little sort of indication of doors behind the helicopter landing spots are probably for multi-mission modules, so it might be things such as those modular containers with extra missiles on board, or they might be something else. But it was a wonderful dream, but Russia probably can't afford it now. And there's certainly reports in the press in the 2020s, 2021 saying that there's no real chance of Russia producing this class of destroyers, and instead they're going to slightly improve the Admiral Gorshkovs, which we mentioned just now, and produce a few more of those, because they cannot afford to produce a major class of destroyer anymore. And this news allegedly made an impact because the Russian public was quite excited about it, whether it was or wasn't is. And as we heard about UK not having forward bases at the moment, Russia is trying to establish some forward bases to allow its frigates and smaller vessels that don't have the long endurance and deep capability of some of the previous destroyers and cruisers that would have been in the fleet. Forward bases are being established to try and enable Russia to project power well beyond its borders. And a typical one here is Tartus port in Syria, which has been built up over the past few years while Russia has been supporting the Syrian regime. Russia has a long-term agreement to be able to base many of its vessels permanently in Tartus, or at least rotate them around, the same as we do with Type 23 frigates in the Gulf for the UK. So Tartus is being built up. Russia would like to get other port agreements in other ports, but at least in the Eastern Mediterranean, Russia has an ability to project power there. As far as destroyers are concerned, only time will tell, but I don't think we will see another Russian destroyer labelled as such for quite a long time. And that concludes the Russian presentation.
So first of all, I'm going to put a caveat on this. I'm not going to spend much time talking about frigates, in large part because of the confusion on them. The first part is because in the US Navy, essentially at the moment, every single frigate in the US Navy is a pre-Cold War frigate. They haven't built any for a long time. And the new frigate that is being developed, to somewhat the consternation in the United States, is actually a FREM. The winner of the contest was the FREM consortium, Fincantieri, but they're building them in the United States, and they're going to be called a Constellation class, but they will be essentially similar to the Aquitaines and the Bergaminis. The other confusing part of it is that if you look at Ian's most unfavorite navy, which is the Chinese end of things, they have some frigates, but the things that are really frightening there aren't frigates and aren't in the PLAN. They're in the Coast Guard. They build Coast Guard vessels, which are the size of frigates and are pretty capable, but they're not really inside the purview of what I'm going to deal with. So I'm going to start off with the United States Navy. At the end of the Cold War, witnessed a dramatic transformation of US Navy destroyer design with the arrival of the Arleigh Burke class. In reality, this was entirely serendipitous, since the design substantially predated the commissioning of the lead ship of the class in 1991. Four principal features distinguish this class from all previous US Navy destroyers: the incorporation of the Aegis combat system, the installation of the SPY passive electronic scanning array radar, the integration of vertical launch system missile cells, and a radically different hull form. Aegis and Spy were fitted into the Spruance-class destroyer hulls to create the Ticonderoga-class cruisers, of which all but the first 5 examples also received vertical launch system cells. But these vessels were more than a little overloaded, as evidenced by the fitting of solid bulwarks at the bow to reduce deck flooding. The advent of jet aircraft, missiles, and nuclear-powered submarines created a host of serious problems for those elements of the fleet tasked with its defense. Faster and more stealthy targets required more sophisticated methods for their detection, and new or improved weapons for their destruction, which in turn required effective systems for their selection and control. Fast targets made it essential to accomplish all this over greater distances and less time. The most obvious solutions were to develop and to put into service new, longer-ranged or more discriminating radars and sonars, and add quick reacting weapons, such as missiles and self-contained quick-firing guns of various calibers, all with their dedicated control radar systems. All major navies quickly adopted these options. The net result of these requirements was that destroyer designs had to expand very significantly to accommodate the new sensors and weapons, and not least their operators. The 8,000-ton Spruance-class destroyers, for example, were designed as replacements for the now obsolete 3,500-ton Fram modernized Deering class, and were lambasted by lay critics for their limited gun and missile armaments, especially when compared with contemporary Soviet destroyers. Similar opprobrium was attached to the British 6,200-ton County-class destroyers when they entered service. Increased size, however, did not prove to be the solution. It became apparent that it was impractical to build destroyers large enough to accommodate the sheer numbers of necessary sensors, weapons, and directors without them interfering with each other, either physically or electronically. Furthermore, the plethora of threat information was overwhelming the capacity of existing combat information centers, while effective defense required operators to analyze the data and respond appropriately with extreme rapidity. The US Navy was quick to articulate a solution, which was to develop a single radar that could offer search, track, and guidance, and was integrated with the combat system. Defining the solution, however, proved to be the easy task. Actually creating the integrated system was much more difficult. Development of the Typhon system, a surface-to-air missile integrated with a phased array radar, began in 1959 and progressed to testing at sea in early 1964. This continued until mid-1965, by which time it had become clear that the system's parameters exceeded the existing state of the art, and the program was cancelled. Even as Typhon was exhibiting its failure, a fresh start was made on a replacement system built around a passive electronically scanned array radar, which was intended to be integrated with a vertical launch missile system. This time there was a successful outcome, and the system, named Aegis, was deployed aboard the guided missile cruiser Ticonderoga, which commissioned in 1983, although without the vertical launch missile system. This was fitted in the 6th and successive members of the class, starting with Bunker Hill, commissioned in 1986. It was also designed into the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers from the outset. The functionality of the Aegis system is laid out in this schematic. The blue items represent sensors, the green items represent the information and direction systems, and the red items represent the response options. At the heart of this is the SPY radar, which can detect and track more than 100 targets at any one time at a distance of 100 miles or more. These data are accessed on the Aegis display system. Passive electronic support measures, navigation radars, and search radars, and airborne sensors here on helicopters or aboard other aircraft, all feed information into the command and decision suite for display on the Aegis system display. Sonar data from either hull-mounted or towed arrays feed into the tactical decision support system for contact, maintenance, tactical awareness, and passive submarine tracking, forwarding this back up to the command and decision suite, and linking to the underwater fire control system, which directs and controls both shipborne and airborne anti-submarine torpedoes and underwater defense decoys and lightweight torpedoes, and where appropriate, vertically launched anti-submarine missiles. The command and decision suite communicate back and forth with other units via satellite communications and the tactical digital information link. Aegis's weapon control system here feeds information to the various fire controls, all those bunched down here, and also directly to electronic countermeasures and the 20mm close-in weapon system, which is Phalanx, which we've talked about before several times, and missile decoy mortars. The individual fire control systems manage guns, harpoon surface-to-surface missiles, and the different standard missiles. The standard missiles are the major missiles, and they are vertically launched, and they can provide anti-aircraft defense, anti-ship, and also land attack and anti-submarine capability. Since its introduction, Aegis has undergone continuous updates. In general, it has proved highly reliable, but the early USS Vincennes incident, when an Iranian airliner was shot down when mistakenly identified as an attacking F-14, demonstrated the need for rigorous training to obviate human error. The Arleigh Burke class has become essentially the only US destroyer type since the retirement of the last of the Spruance class in 2005. There are now 73 active ships and another 19 under construction or planned. In many ways, the least appreciated new feature of the Arleigh Burke class is the hull form. Previous US destroyers almost always had a length-to-beam ratio of around 10:1, which was viewed as a necessity for speed. The length-to-beam ratio of the Arleigh Burke class is a little less than 8:1. The hull has marked shear forward and considerable bow flare and a proportionally wider transom than previous destroyers. Yet the greater waterplane of the design results in a speed loss of only 1 or 2 knots, and the speed is listed only as in excess of 30 knots. So I don't know exactly how fast it goes, versus the 32.5 knots of the Spruance class, both of them with the same power installation. The great benefits of this new hull form are both much improved seakeeping and the ability to maintain high speed in rougher weather conditions. The US Navy's original intent was not to keep the Arleigh Burke class in production for close to 40 years, nor for the class to be virtually the only destroyer type in the fleet. The radical Zumwalt class was the intended successor. These huge destroyers, close to 16,000 tons in displacement, feature a wave-piercing hull form with marked tumble home and superstructure designed for minimum radar cross-section. They have an integrated electric propulsion system powered by gas turbines that also provides the power for weapons. Every effort was made to reduce crew size to the minimum. Initially, armament was to be 2 6-inch advanced gun systems in single turrets, firing special long-range land attack projectiles held in a 920-round magazine. There are also 80 vertical launch missile cells. In the event, the special projectiles never materialized. So the guns are functionally inoperative and are being replaced by a hypersonic missile that is still under development. The Navy planned for 32 of the Zumwalt class. This was quickly pared down to 24 as cost estimates overran, then to 7 as cost rose still further, and finally to 3 ships as the Navy reeled from sticker shock when it realized that the program costs had risen to $22.5 billion, $7.5 billion per ship, which was twice the unit cost for an Arleigh class destroyer. Actually, it's more like, it's close to 3, but leave it at that. I might mention that the Zumwalt, I was rather lucky to be allowed access to Bath Ironworks twice while Zumwalt was under construction, under strict supervision, let me tell you. And so I got to see how these were being put together, and it was an absolutely fascinating demonstration of technical achievement, even though they're ridiculously expensive. So let's move on to the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. Japan's post-Cold War destroyers owed much to the contemporary Arleigh Burke type. The first 4, the Congo class, used a very similar hull form, but are 25 feet longer and 3 feet beamier. Their armament and electronic outfit also are very similar, centered on the American Aegis system, which incidentally shows up in a lot of the European frigates that Michael mentioned. One significant difference is the larger superstructure, driven by the need for command facilities not required by the US Navy. The next 4 destroyers, the Atago class, are 4 meters longer than the Congo class, and this allowed for the installation of a hangar for the embarked helicopter. And the latest Japanese destroyers are the 2 ships of the Maya class. These use an enlarged Atago class hull, almost 5 meters longer and 1.2 meters beamier. Gas turbines still provide the main propulsion, but smaller gas turbines and diesel engines are used as generators to power electric motors for low speeds. These 2 ships also will carry 2 quadruple canisters for the Type 17 indigenous anti-ship missiles. Like these American counterparts, these Japanese destroyers are being upgraded later versions of the Aegis system as they undergo refit. They are also being equipped with direct control and fire the anti-ballistic missile version of the standard weapon, a measure also in progress in the US Navy. So now we move on to everybody's other favorite Navy, the People's Liberation Army Navy. The emergence of the modern Great Wall at Sea coincides almost exactly with the ending of the Cold War and was a significant manifestation of communism with a capitalist face promoted by Deng Xiaoping. When the process began, the PLAN was characterized by dilapidated warships and infrastructure, somewhat lackadaisical personnel, and limited oceanic ambitions. I can speak to this from personal experience because I was working in China at the time and ended up accidentally kind of on 2 PLAN Navy bases. And while they were in better condition than the Russian destroyers that we saw earlier, things were pretty odd. And so was the fact that the personnel were lackadaisical. In one case, I literally walked through the gate and was walking around inside there looking for something else, nothing to do with these ships. And somebody came up and said, "What are you doing here?" So I told them that I was lost, and they said, "Oh, you need to go that way," and sent me off. China's subsequent spectacular economic growth totally transformed the PLAN and its situation. The first manifestation of this emerging new fleet was the Type 052 destroyers. It should be noted that type numbers in the PLAN, unlike most other fleets, do not usually identify new designs. the Type 052 indicates that the destroyer design is a gas turbine-powered vessel, while Type 051 indicates that the design uses steam turbines. The two original Type 052 destroyers, Harbin and Qingdao, entered service in the middle 1990s and marked a considerable departure from previous warships. At 4,700 tons, they were about 30% larger than their precursors, and they introduced gas turbine propulsion, in this case, licensed or purchased General Electric gas turbines from the United States, modern Italian-derived combat direction systems, effective surface-to-air missiles, which was the French Crotale, and a serious blue water capability. The basic design was also indigenous, although much of its other outfit was Soviet-derived. Western observers have noted that they appear to have rather limited potential survivability. The single 6,000-ton Type 051B destroyer Shenzhen reverted to steam turbines, largely because they were having problems because the United States had imposed sanctions and wasn't selling them any more gas turbines. The design introduced the sloping hull and superstructure sides to reduce radar cross-section. In service, it did not live up to expectations, leaving the PLAN to purchase 4 slightly modified versions of the Russian Sovremeny type, which were called Project 956E and Project 956EM, while a more effective indigenous design was developed. This emerged as the two 7,000-ton Type 052B destroyers, Guangzhou and Wuhan, which commissioned in 2004. As with earlier destroyers, there was extensive reliance on Russian technology for sensors and weaponry, especially for its primary anti-aircraft outfit of 48 Steel 1 missiles, which had a range of around 35 kilometers. The hull design was a stealthier version of that used in the single Type 051B, and the gas turbines were Ukrainian. The 6 destroyers of the Type 052C represented a notable advance on their precursors. The hull design itself was very similar to the Type 052B, but incorporated the first Chinese vertical launch missile system for 48 HHQ-9 missiles with a range in excess of 120 kilometers. The electronics also were indigenous, although some were derived from foreign designs. Most importantly, the class introduced the Type 346 active electronically scanned array. There's 4 panels, 2 here and then 2 on the other side of the superstructure, which you can't see, for search and fire direction. The ultimate development of this series is the Type 052D, of which 40 are either in service or under construction. Almost all the 30 ships of the first 3 batches have been commissioned, and a 4th batch is under construction at the rate of 3 or 4 ships a year. An improved version of the Type 346 radar, the Type 346A, here are the other panels here, you can see, is integrated with a modern combat direction system claimed by the Chinese media to be as effective as the US Aegis system. The vertical launch system was also upgraded with 64 cells, able to accommodate surface-to-air, surface-to-surface, and anti-submarine missiles, making the class true multi-mission destroyers. In production virtually in parallel are the very large 12,000-ton destroyers of the Type 055, of which 6 have been commissioned and a further 16 are under construction. The type includes extensive measures to limit radar, noise, infrared, and electromagnetic radiation signatures. The core armament is 112 vertical launch missile cells, integrated with an updated Type 346B radar, which now has 6 panels, 3 on each side like that, 1, 2, 3, and parallel, and a combat direction system. Chinese sources claim this to have anti-stealth and anti-satellite capabilities. So the PLAN has come a long way since the 1990s.